Today on Uncommon Sense, join us as we talk to Dan Kerr, President and Headmaster at St. Martin's Academy, a Catholic boarding high school for boys that combines classical academics with an integrated work program on a sustainable farm. Join us for all that and more on Uncommon Sense. Hello, and welcome back to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. As I mentioned, we are joined today with Dan Kerr. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm Gretelyn Darkey, your co-host, and I'm joined with my wonderful co-host as usual, Joe Grabowski. Joe, how are you today?
Very well, thanks.
Wonderful. So let's just dive right in. Dan, why don't I gave you a slight intro there at the beginning, shamelessly stolen from your LinkedIn page. But
I didn't even know I had a LinkedIn page.
It was too well written. I said, this is good.
Okay.
But if you don't mind, if you want to expand a little, maybe tell us a bit about yourself and maybe how you came to this position of running such an interesting institution.
Well, there's probably a short version and a long version. I don't know what this will end up being, but I'll ramble for a minute. So I grew up on a little farm in southeast Kansas. And in my life, I've lived in Texas and California and Pennsylvania, where you two are. But I found my way back to this little corner of southeast Kansas. And in fact, the school, St. Martin's Academy, is built effectively in my backyard and where I grew up. How that all has come about is really a story, I think, of God's good timing and in providence and the Holy Ghost maneuvering in my life from the time I was just a little boy growing up here, so it's a long story. I think basically I can go back to the time when I was in grade school here at a little parochial school called St. Mary's. And St. Mary's at the time was it had been defunct for 15 or 20 years. And there were some young and rather idealistic and energetic graduates from the University of Kansas who came down and alighted in Fort Scott. And these graduates from the University of Kansas were also members of a very unique program there called the Integrated Humanities Program, which some of your listeners may know of. In particular, there were 3 professors there led by Dr. John Sr., and they did a lot of wonderful things that the reverberations are still being felt throughout Catholic culture, and St. Martin's is one of them. But I was, from a very young age, exposed to this sort of pedagogical way, which is described as the poetic mode or the gymnastic mode of education, and through my life, I've been at one time or another taking a kind of journey in my own education, and that has led to being at this point with a lot of wonderful stops along the way. So I feel very fortunate to be here and to be a founding member of this school. I'm happy to give more detail on any of those particular points.
I think just to jump in a little bit and maybe tell our listeners how your school works. It's obviously unconventional, or maybe conventional in an old-fashioned sense. But tell us a little bit about how that works.
Well, in the first place, I would say we're a boarding school, right? So our boys are here from September through May, and they have breaks that mirror what I would say would be a college or a university. They have a long Christmas break, they have a long Easter break, right? But they are here when they're here and school is in session. They're here 24/7. And these boys come from all over the country. We even have a couple of brothers from South Africa, a couple of brothers from Canada. But they come from all over the country, California, New Hampshire, Florida, Texas, all points in between. Okay, so it's not just, Midwesterners necessarily, although I would say our largest concentration of boys comes from the Midwest. So it's a boarding environment, and so really our approach here, our educational approach, is not just limited, of course, to what's being done in the classroom, right? We don't see the educational enterprise here as being even primarily academic, right? This is an education for the whole person, body, mind, and soul. And I think our life here is Benedictine in the dispensation of ora et labora, that is prayer and work. And by work, I would mean the physical work that we do on the farm, but also the intellectual work that we do in the classroom, and the spiritual work that we do in the chapel. But it's prayer and work. There's a certain rhythm to the day. We rise with morning prayer. We have Mass at 8 o'clock each morning after the boys have turned out and done their chores. And those chores, by the way, look like a variety of things. It looks like baking bread. It looks like cleaning bathrooms. It looks like milking cows, slopping hogs, you name it, right? So there's a certain economy of the home, as it were. This is basically a large home. There's a certain economy of the home, and that requires daily maintenance and care. And so the boys participate in that each day. Of course, we have classes that comprise the bulk of the morning and the afternoon, and then study hall, recreation time, and the day concludes with Compline. We have classes Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And on Wednesday, we actually take a break from classes altogether. And we have what we call Work Wednesday or Soulcraft Wednesday, which is named sort of in a nod to a wonderful book by Matthew Crawford called Shop Class as Soulcraft. I highly recommend that book. But we turn out for larger work projects on Wednesday. So as you could imagine, if you're taking on projects on the farm, just half an hour or an hour each day isn't sufficient to really take on a significant project. So we set aside one day each week, Wednesday, and each Wednesday morning we take on larger work projects around the school and the farm, and we even do community service projects here in Fort Scott. And then in the afternoon, the boys are free to pursue some of their own interests. We have a mastery program that is similar to a Boy Scout merit badge program, but we have our own kind of spin to it. And the boys pursue things like that in the afternoons on Wednesday. And then the weekends are a time for recreation, for other work projects, and for the kind of unscripted social time that is just important for boys to kind of go get lost in the woods, go camping, and just let boys be boys. So in sum, I would say it's a cultural education. It's a way of life. It's a 24/7 proposition is what we have here. And that, I think, so far in our experience, we're in year 5, has worked marvelously well. Thanks be to God.
Wonderful. That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm very taken with this idea that it's holistic, right? Because I think that one of the most lacking things in modern education, which is something we certainly at the society are trying to rectify with our own efforts in the Chesterton Schools Network, but then you're doing in quite a unique way down there at St. Martin's, is that character formation piece that is just so much unfortunately left out of the conversation in modern education, and yet it was really kind of central to the classical vision of what it meant to be educated, right? That there was more to it than just book learning or getting information in your head. It was about feeding the soul and training the body and taking that holistic approach. I'm curious to learn like how how do the boys take to it? I'm sure that like at our Chesterton schools, you sometimes get maybe a student who's somewhat reluctant to come, and do you have any fun stories of somebody who's kind of turned around, came maybe not looking forward to the experience, but ended up quite changed?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Well, I think it's worth noting, just to put us on the map a little bit, being a boarding school in America, you, I think one tends, with reason, to automatically think of two different sorts of schools. One would be a reform school, right? Like a military academy or some sort of place, maybe that's a get back to nature type of place where young folks, boys or girls, would go who are struggling to fit into, whatever kind of the conventional model is. Maybe they're having behavioral issues or challenges at home. And so they're leaving a lot of times probably against their will to go to school somewhere, right? So you've got that. You've got a reform school, and then on the other hand, you have what we would think of, or at least I would think of, kind of being kind of the coastal elite schools, which are academic powerhouses, the Philip Exeters of the world, which are very expensive. The name of the game is getting into an Ivy League school, making some kind of, making a series of connections. It's really about taking that kind of next step, right? So it's a prep school. It's preparing you for the next step. We're neither of those things, right? So we're not really a reform school in that we are not in the business of taking young men who don't want to be here, right? And trying to straighten them out somehow. At the same time, we're not a prep school in the sense that your experience here is not primarily about some sort of predetermined path forward that every St. Martin's student takes, right? What we are is something in the middle, which is a school for young men of goodwill whose parents and who themselves want to kind of go on an adventure and take on a serious challenge at this point in time in their life. And what comes next is really a matter for discernment and for what God has in store for them. And we look, our mission, what we say is that we are trying to help these young men become saints. And we see our role um, in that process as being, I would say, soil builders, right? There's Augustine, it's credited to Augustine. I don't know if he said it or not. Deus agricola est. God is a farmer, right? And of course, you have the parable of the sower, um, where the seed is spread out and it finds rocky ground and isn't able to get a purchase. And then in other cases, it's choked by weeds. But in some cases, it finds really good ground, fertile ground, right? And it's able to build roots and grow. And I think that's the fundamental proposition of education is to build good soil. And I think that's what we are about here, right? And so that soil is to encompass the entire person, right? Not just their mind, not just their physical well-being, but their whole person, the spiritual dimension, the psychological dimension, the emotional dimension. It's everything, right? So, to get back to your question, Joe, have we had boys who've been here who've been, let's say, apprehensive about what they're getting into? Absolutely. In fact, if you came here and you weren't apprehensive, I would I would question your sanity a little bit because you're signing up for something that's pretty radical and pretty different, right? I mean, I don't apart from my alma mater, which is St. Gregory's Academy, or now it's called Gregory the Great Academy. It's out in Pennsylvania, and it's where I went to school, and it changed my life. Apart from Gregory the Great, I don't know of any other place like this. So when a boy comes here, they're coming to some place that is almost certainly very different from what they've experienced in their life to that point. So apprehensive, yes. A lot of boys think that they're going to miss, for example, technology. We have a no screen policy here on campus. The boys don't have smartphones. They don't even have computers. Okay. When they write their papers, they handwrite their papers. It's kind of brutal. No one knows how to write anymore. I mean, physically, they just don't know how to write.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a cross mostly for, I think, the teachers. So we have to try to read that. But there's, the boys think that many of them think, oh, I'm going to miss technology. I'm going to miss having my phone. I'm going to miss my screen time. And yeah, there's a period of detox, as it were, from tech, but it's pretty quick. And I think the boys, before they know it, have almost forgotten about, those kinds of habits. Because they're replaced by, I think, what is a much fuller and richer life because it's actually real. It's real. And real life is better than life mediated through a screen. And boys deep down know that and they want it. And so they respond, except for those who have, I would say, a deep and profound kind of addiction to tech, to video games, things like that. Those who are just open to what we're doing and generally have a goodwill, even if they're apprehensive about it, they tend to flourish because what we're doing is not anything, although it may seem a bit radical, by the standards of how people have lived and behaved for thousands of years. It's pretty normal and sane, right? So boys tend to flourish in this environment.
I love the sort of Chestertonian link of this is an adventure. I think that's so, because I think a lot of people could look at what you're doing and say, whoa, what a lot of work. But I also think it's important that you're sort of teaching boys not to be afraid of work. I think that's sort of a plague in our society today. There's sort of this fear of actually working, and it's not actually a bad thing. It was given to us by God as our duty, right? To take care of the earth, to work on the earth, and to work with animals. And it's just an amazing thing you're doing. And I love the idea of it as an adventure. That's a very Chestertonian flavor to that.
Well, I think that the boys complain about different things here, right? As you could imagine. You get a group of men together or boys together, and complaining, is one of the things they're particularly can be good at. Becomes an art form. But one thing they never complain about, ever, is the work on the farm. Never. They get up at 6:30 in the morning and come out and milk cows by hand. Rain, sleet, snow, doesn't matter. It gets cold down here, not Minnesota cold, but it gets cold. Sub-zero, usually once a winter. It gets cold. It's decidedly inconvenient to get out of bed at that hour of the day and go milk a cow. The boys do not complain about that. And I think that's for a number of reasons. One is that I think deep down, most boys want to do things that are hard. They do. They do. They don't, even though the comfortable life is easier, yes, it doesn't answer to that deep need that is in the heart of a young man for a challenge, right? For an adventure. And specifically to do hard things with other young men, in the friendship and in the company of other young men. And those friendships are just forged through getting up early and doing this kind of work together. And that is one of the greatest gifts. And so this gets back to my own personal experience here, Gretelin, which is I went to a boarding school. It's very similar in a lot of ways. And we did hard things. And it was a rigorous life. And the friendships that I made there, the experience that I had, changed my life. And I consider it to be one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given in my life. And it is indeed the inspiration for this school. But it's transformative. It changes you. And it opens up your mind and your imagination to a different kind of world, which is exhilarating, you know? And so that's a gift that we're trying to give to these young men, which is the gift, in a lot of ways, the gift of friendship. But friendship isn't forged by playing video games remotely and talking smack through social media. It's forged by doing real things together, and usually hard things that are challenging. That includes prayer, that includes work, that includes study.
That's interesting, yeah. A lot of my husband's longtime friendships were forged in sports, which is
Yes.
one of the hardest things I think most boys do these days. So.
Amen. You know what? I used to look down, and cut me off if I just, because I can really get rambling here. But I used to look down, when I was in a parochial school before I went out to St. Greg's, I transferred as a junior. I got good grades. I was in debate and forensics. And even though I love sports, I was not very athletic and I was also super small. And so I didn't do I didn't do very well. Well, you can kind of look down your nose at the football team, you know, but honestly, I see now in a lot of schools, the football team is kind of the last place where just hard things are being done. And there's kind of an objective standard for whether you're winning or losing. You know, it's good. Yeah. It's a good thing. I'm all for the small town football team. Go, you know, nice. Do it. We play rugby here, by the way, which is the greatest sport in the world. Greatest team sport in the world.
The hard version of football.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much of what you were saying, Dan, made me think of, you know, the social science you read about and just the anecdotal experience of a lot of friends of mine who have moved away from traditional schooling, or, well, rather, let's say conventional schooling, to homeschooling and things, partly because it's significant. They always make reference to their sons, the little boys. It's you know, we've just adopted this thing that it's natural for especially a little boy to sit behind a desk in a classroom, you know, for 8 hours straight and, you know, do these kinds of things. And I think that what you're doing is showing that if you tap into that energy that modern education has to interpret as a problem, you know, the fidgetiness, the destructiveness, you know, why do boys start carving on their desks? Well, it's because you don't give them a stick and a knife to whittle, right? I mean, that's why they're carving their desks. So it's a lovely thing that you're letting boys be boys, but that doesn't result in just destruction. That results in fruition, which is wonderful.
Yeah, well, boys are, as you know, they're kinetic. They're in motion, and
Hmm.
it's not the best idea uh, to try to solve that problem by planting them, as you said, in a seat and at a desk for the better part of a day to do largely abstract mental work. That is so contrary to their nature. Now they can do a little bit of it, right? It's got to be done on the heels of, I think, physical exertion, or in conjunction with a lot of physical exertion and movement. Or else I don't think it works. I just
That's
don't think it works.
it shows a lot of the that you see these statistics that girls do better in school. It's like, well, yeah. if they can sit for longer, they're gonna do better. Just sort of statistically, that makes sense. But yeah, it's so. Do you see a better academic outcome because of your philosophy there and your use of movement and labor?
Well, I can
Maybe better
only
is the wrong word. Yeah, more like, are they getting it more? I guess is what I want to say.
right. Yeah, it would be. It's a little hard for me to answer that directly, right? Because I don't necessarily have something um, to compare it to, and our boys don't take, necessarily don't take the same kind of standardized tests or things like that. I mean, they take the ACT, the SAT, uh, right? But those are kind of games that you learn how to play, right?
Oh yeah.
It doesn't actually judge much other than, kind of like how well you take a standardized test, right? Um, but I mean, the just the science behind this is so clear that there's an interesting book. I read this maybe last year. I think it's called Spark, but they did this actually at the public school level. And this was at a community in Chicago. I want to say maybe like Naperville or something like that, one of these suburbs of Chicago. And it was pushed forward by the PE teacher. It was based upon some neurological uh, data, and they started doing, before class each morning. They would have the kids run a mile.
Wow.
And their performance in the classroom just went through, I don't know if it was through the roof, but substantial improvement
Hmm.
in their, basically just across the board, academically, in the morning, as
Hmm.
opposed to the group that did not do this. Right? So just chemically, I mean, you know this, right? You know this. You go, you exercise vigorously, and then you sit down to read or to do some work, and your mind is clear. Your focus is sharp. I mean, this isn't, we just know this instinctively, or by experience we know this, right? You can write a book about it, and which this guy did, and do trials and experiments, but we just know this, right? And it's certainly true of young boys who are just exploding with energy that needs to be harnessed and channeled in a healthy way. And they need a lot, I mean, a lot of physical engagement and exertion to release that energy and to harness it in a healthy way.
Hmm.
There's almost, you can't I don't think you can. I don't think you can work them too hard. I mean, they're almost boundless in their energy. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Nice. Yeah, my son he's 5. He just recently got St. George and the Dragon book for his birthday, and
yeah,
he's been reading it continuously, and he's not daunted by this hard task this knight has to do. He thinks it's the best thing ever, and I'm like, all right, gonna remember this. Gonna set you some things to do.
Is that the one with the beautiful illustrations? Do you remember?
Yes.
Yeah, boy, that's a great one,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Yes, it is.
And it's one of those things that, I think it speaks not only to the sort of imaginative element, but it speaks to what you're talking about here, the sort of hard task that a man actually wants to do.
Yeah, that's right. And there was a Protestant fellow, John, I'm not remembering the last name. He wrote a book called Wild at Heart. Do you remember this? Joe, do you know this book?
Vaguely. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of the name either, but I know the book.
He talks about, and there's this kind of archetypal story, it's the hero's journey, right? Every boy needs an adventure to go on, a dragon to slay, and a fair damsel to rescue and protect and fight for. Like that's every boy needs that. Needs to go on the hero's journey. And it gets into there's a really good book that I recommend to every parent that is considering sending their boy to St. Martin's, and it's called Leaving Boyhood Behind by Jason Craig. Do y'all know Jason? He has an outfit called Fraternus. He's a great guy, and he wrote this small but I think powerful book called Leaving Boyhood Behind, and it just talks about the kind of the crisis in manhood in the church and abroad that we're all well too familiar with. But really what he's exploring is, and I'm reading this book right now, it's right here on my desk, he's exploring rites of passage. This is kind of the seminal work on rites of passage by this Frenchman. He actually coined the phrase rites of passage. But basically, every culture of enduring value has rites of passage, and there are natural rites of passage for women in bearing a child, most notably.
Yep.
But the rites of passage for men have to be in some way engineered, because we can largely opt out of that rite of passage of the child, except for the fun part, right? So every culture has scripted rites of passage in which boys are officially sort of brought along this journey. It mirrors this idea of kind of the hero's journey, where they have to do difficult things, right? And kind of come through this arduous process, and then they're welcomed in and incorporated into the community of men, right? And we just don't have those rites of passage anymore in today's society. They don't exist. They don't exist. And it's no wonder that, we have boys we have 35, 40-year-old boys who've never become men because they've never done anything hard. They've never had any separation from, every rite of passage they say has 3 parts: separation, initiation, and incorporation. It's fascinating stuff, but it's very real. And one of the things I'm pleased about, and this wasn't necessarily intentional, it was something maybe instinctive, but it's real, is that this school, St. Martin's, is a great place for these rites of passage to be enacted. It has all 3 of those elements very specifically as part of your as part of coming here. So
Beautiful. Yeah, isn't it interesting how sometimes you set out to do one thing and the Holy Spirit kind of moves you to do something even greater than you thought.
wait, that's amen. Amen to that.
Amen. I'm just going to pause us here for a second. But this has been so fascinating. But we do want to remind everybody that Dan Kerr is one of the troubadours. Neglected to mention that at the beginning. But he's one of the great troubadours, and he's going to be speaking at the conference this year, our Chesterton Conference. So if you would like to hear Dan and hear him in the amazing banter with the other troubadours, Dale and William Fahey and Chris Check and Joseph Pierce, it's really amazing, and it's especially a fun experience to see them live. So do think about coming to the conference if you want to learn more. You can visit chesterton.org/conference and learn how to sign up and or virtually, that we have a virtual option as well. But we hope that you can join us in Minnesota this year. It's going to be really, really exciting and really fun. And one of the unique things about our conference is we don't keep our speakers sort of in a box. We encourage them to come out and talk to the people that are there. We have what's called the Afterglow, where people, after the talks, you can hang out, and you might even meet some of the speakers, and you can talk to them you can talk to Dan about pigs and cows and young men and all the things that he's been talking to us about in greater detail. So consider going to chesterton.org/conference to learn more.
I'm looking forward to that conference. That's in St. Paul this year?
Yes, Minneapolis. St.
Minneapolis,
Paul.
yep.
Minneapolis. Okay. Beautiful. Can't wait.
Yeah, it should be a good one. Dan, one of I think the first time we met was last year's conference. I'd been watching the Troubadours online prior to that, but I very much appreciated at some point at the Afterglow you got hold of a guitar from someone and started playing a little bit. And so this is sort of changing subjects on us, but I know that we have something in common. We're both great admirers of Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
I think at a recent Troubadours Tuesday night summit, I think you actually named Dylan as one of your favorite American poets.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dylan was my first concert experience, and the person I've seen in concert the most. So,
really,
what's your Yeah, I love him. What's your favorite Dylan piece, if you had to pick? I mean, you can name three if you're like me and you can't really narrow it down. But
if I were to do three, I would probably say Boots of Spanish Leather.
Mm-hmm.
Boots of Spanish Leather, which is, by the way, is published in the Norton Anthology of Poetry.
Mm.
Deservedly, I think, yeah.
Deservedly.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know why this one, other than I just love it, and it runs in my head frequently. But he has a song called "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue."
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that one?
Oh yeah.
Love it. And then I would have to say, well, it's very hard, Joe. I mean, I really do love Dylan, and I really love so many of it. My wife got me it was about 3 years ago for Christmas, the entire collection, every one of Dylan's albums.
Wow.
Did you see this thing?
Yeah.
They had to come in a paper, like a cardboard sleeve,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Wow.
But every one of them, there was like 48 albums or something like this.
Yeah.
I'll say Visions of Joanna, number 3.
Okay. Yeah.
How about you? I want to hear yours.
Oh boy. Well, my favorite album probably is Blood on the Tracks. And so many numbers off of that just stick with me. Simple Twist of Fate.
Oh yeah.
Is definitely one of my top 3 probably. an odd one, just because I think it personifies or embodies what Dylan is as kind of the great American balladeer. Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's just a fun song. And then probably I'd say Every Grain of Sand. It's kind of this meditation, very kind of a Sirach kind of piece. Close runner-up, though, is just for musicality. When it bothers the heck out of me when people say Dylan's not a good musician or not a good singer. I think he is in his own way. It was a track left off of Infidels in the 80s called Blind Willie McTell. And they released it as a bootleg recording in the bootleg tracks. But it's Dylan on piano and Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. He was the producer of the album. He's playing guitar. And Dylan's everything about that. His vocal performance, the way he runs the rhythm on the piano, and you can hear him stomping on the pedal. It's just a great, it's a really great piece. So
I really like Dylan's vocals. Now, to me, the best album where it's really pure. Evidently, the rumor is that he quit smoking for like 6 months before this album is Nashville Skyline.
Yeah.
Right. And he has this beautiful duet that's the first track with Johnny Cash, which is Girl from the North Country. Right? It's a masterpiece. And then he tried to make, he described it later as, he tried to make an album of music, and he said it was one of the hardest things he's ever done. Happy music. Happy music. But what a great album it is. It's very upbeat, but his vocals are just excellent, very pure. But what I love about Dylan, I think he's a great vocalist. I really do. And I think part of what makes him great, and it's kind of why Willie Nelson has very pure voice, but Willie Nelson's phrasing is so interesting. And Dylan has very, I think, interesting, complex, and beautiful phrasing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't mean his choice of words. I mean the rhythm and tempo at which he articulates those words. And I think of this one. There's an old folk song called Barbara Allen. Do you know that song? Mm-mm. It's an old ballad. And Dylan this is on a track. This is on an album that's hard to find. It's called Live at the Gaslight, and he sings Barbara Allen. What a masterpiece of phrasing in his vocals. It's just extraordinary, and it shows you. I mean that capacity, that ability to do that it really enhances the poetry. Course.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's also definitely worked at too, because he, you know, Gretelin is a trained singer. I took 8 years of vocal lessons back in the day as well, and I was also a trombonist. And yet, sometimes I'm in the car, and one of his songs in particular, Moonshiner, another bootleg track comes on.
Great.
And I try to sing along and hold those phrases through one breath. I can't do it.
No.
And again, I'm a trombonist, trained singer, and I'm like, I don't know where. And he wasn't a big man, you know. He's not Pavarotti. He doesn't have like giant lungs, you know, to rest upon.
And he was a chain smoker. Still is.
And he was a chain smoker. Yeah.
Good breath management. I don't know.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's really impressive. So.
Yeah. No, I'm a huge fan. And of course, my compatriot Chris Jack, I hilariously puts Warren Zevon above Dylan.
I know.
I think he's just playing. I think it's just being, you know.
He's winding you up there.
He's winding me up. I think he's winding all of us up. But then part of me thinks he actually believes it, and then I'd become concerned for Chris. I mean, I think an intervention might be needed. I mean, it's alarming.
Oh,
it's alarming.
That's funny. Well, I appreciate this. I have not listen to as much Dylan as I should, and it's always great for me to come away from these interviews with something new to explore. So thank you.
Well, if you're gonna while you're at Dylan Gretelin, okay, his backup band, I think, is probably the greatest rock band of all time, and they're just called the Band.
The band. Yeah.
Well, if they're the best band, right? They just need to be the band.
You need to listen to the band while you're
Sure.
getting familiar with Dylan. Listen
Yeah.
to the band because they're the best.
Yeah, I don't want to show my ignorance, but I don't know. I'm a classically trained singer, like Joe said, but I love blues, true blues music. I mean, not country as it is today, but the real stuff. So.
Well,
Yeah.
the cool thing about rock and roll, when it's done real rock and roll, like the best expression of rock and roll, is that it takes all those genres of jazz and the blues and gospel and country and old timey, and it mixes them all up together. And then you get rock and roll.
Yeah, and that hardly ever happens in modern any kind of music. So that's
that's right. That's right. It's so rare, but that's why the band's so good because they pull it off.
Cool. Thank you. I'll get my Dylan education. It's good. My professor who I worked for, who wrote some books about Dylan, will be proud of me from the beyond, wherever he is right now. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I am gonna keep us on time here and wrap us up here. But that was a fun detour.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe, for bringing that up. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing. Appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to late July in the Twin Cities. So I'll see you in person there.
It's gonna be amazing. And remember, if you want to sign up, chesterton.org/conference. It's gonna be a really good one. And again, thank you, Joe, for co-hosting. It's always a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
And of course, thank you for listening. Please make sure that you subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a review, anything you can do to help us reach more people, make more Chesterton friends, because as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.